U.S. President Special Envoy Steve Witkoff will visit Moscow on Wednesday or Thursday. Donald Trump said this the day before in a conversation with journalists, clarifying that the meeting was initiated by the Russian side. When asked what the Russians can do to avoid the sanctions that are set to be announced this Friday, Trump replied, "Make a deal that will stop people from dying." On Truth Social, he wrote that since the beginning of this year alone, Russia has lost 112,500 soldiers on the battlefield. Ukraine, 8,000. Trump once again called the war senseless and complained that it seemed to him like something that would be easy to stop. But in practice, it turned out not to be the case. So if the fighting doesn't stop, he promises to impose sanctions on Russia. And he once again confirmed his intention the day before.
Well, there will be sanctions, but they managed to get around sanctions pretty well. They're crafty characters. Steve might go, it seems, on Wednesday or Thursday to Russia. They want to meet with him. They asked for a meeting. We'll see what happens.
Fresh cotton in Russia. In the Volgograd region, a fire broke out at the Frolovo railway junction. As a result of a drone attack, relay cabinets caught fire, which led to a power outage on a section of the railway. Airports in Volgograd and Tambov have also suspended operations.
An oil depot is on fire in Sochi, in the Avla resort area. Drones flew into Russia last night. Fuel tanks are engulfed in flames. Locals who filmed the strike said that the Kubanef product oil depot is burning. It is located near the local airport. Operations there were suspended and more than 50 flights were delayed. The mayor of Sochi confirmed the attack and the strike on a petroleum tank with a capacity of 2,000 cubic meters. Ukraine's defense forces blew up a bridge that had been mined by the Russians themselves. Operators of the 1st Separate Territorial Defense Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces have released a video showing the destruction of a Russian crossing over the Tsada River in the Bryansk region. The footage shows how Ukrainian FPV drone stealthily approaches the target and detonates near the explosives that the enemy had prepared to blow up the bridge in a critical situation. This crossing was supposed to be used for redeploying troops, as well as delivering ammunition and supplies to the enemy army. Now the bridge is down and 3 villages have been cut off from Russia. Meanwhile, in the Donetsk region, the Russians have advanced near 4 settlements. This is evidenced by data from the Deep State Analytical Project. The occupiers' advance was recorded near Torsky in the Lyman direction and near Orkhov on the Pokrovsk section of the front. The enemy is also putting pressure on the Novopavlivka direction. Heavy fighting is ongoing there, according to the Operational Strategic Group, Kortitsia. The enemy army, despite losses in manpower and equipment, is trying to push its offensive. Overall, there were 138 clashes on the front line over the past day, according to the General Staff.
But by destroying the enemy in this way, we are pushing them closer and closer to a full-scale mobilization, which could seriously shake up the situation against the backdrop of economic and sanctions-related blows. In other words, this is a complex story, and sanctions do not take effect immediately. To date, the steps taken in Europe regarding trade with the United States have been very appropriate. And in fact, Europe is weaning itself off Russia's gas and oil dependency. And that's what I was talking about. You know, sanctions aren't a one-time thing. It's a very long, drawn-out strategic process. And soon, we'll finally see the quintessence of these sanction packages that have been implemented since 2014. Because, say, the Germans or some other country couldn't just go and shut off the valve like we can do at home. No, it doesn't work like that. They would have left the whole country without gas. Obviously, it was a long, drawn-out process.
By what criteria will we see that Putin is approaching the possible introduction of mobilization in Russia?
Russian losses at the front, meaning they're getting bigger and bigger. Do you mean what signs we'll see that? Actually, there will be more processes. Remember, in fact, this hunt for people started for them 2 years ago. There was a wave of mobilization when they needed to replenish their losses. They will do it again. We'll see it on the streets, how they'll actually be rounding people up. They already have everything ready for this. They've long since made all the changes needed in their military enlistment offices to be able to press the red button. They're just waiting for the right moment to start it up again. So basically, it'll be people being rounded up in public unrest about how their enlistment offices operate.
But at the same time, they still have enough resources to move their equipment to Belarus. Yesterday, movements of APCs with red squares were spotted on the streets of Gomel. These were recorded, and Belvarda publish the footage. And now the question arises, has Putin really decided to go ahead with those exercises he talked about? He announced them for the fall, as he likes to announce things.
Why not? Why shouldn't they hold these exercises and terrorize Europe? A hybrid war against NATO is already underway, and high-ranking generals in the alliance and in Europe understand this. In other words, this war is already ongoing. And what we saw there last week in Vilnius, when a Garand drone flew over Vilnius, it's an analog of the Shahid drone. So the fact that it was in the city, that it flew over, and that the Lithuanians spent 5 days searching for that same UAV. This is an element of hybrid warfare, and they will keep ramping up the pressure. They will try to scare Europeans.
But this debunks the myth that they're about to run out of APCs, that the Russians are supposedly running out of equipment any moment now.
They have everything they need. They'll scrounge up supplies on different markets in North Korea and China. There's a so-called axis of evil that's been formed under their Russia's leadership. They'll find weapons, and they have a systematic approach to figuring out where to move and where to get all these things. But in the long run, we're actually going to win. What I see today, the processes that are happening, yes, we're losing kilometers. But systematically, we're wearing Russia down, we're killing their economy, we're exhausting their army. And last week in Helsinki, the president said a very good phrase. It's time for the West to consider regime change in Russia. Soon this regime will falter, and we need to seize the opportunity. That will be our moment to completely destabilize the enemy.
But China's position is that they will not allow Russia to lose. That's what they've stated.
It would be a blow for them. They need Russia to keep waging war so that our partners keep helping us. In other words, this way they're draining their own economy. China needs this as part of their operation regarding Taiwan, which they're preparing anyway, and it will happen here.
So China has the resources to support Russia when they...
They do, but they're in a recession right now. Their economy isn't as good and stable as it used to be. They're in a recession at the moment. Their market today isn't as efficient as it was before. The Americans, Trump after all, well, you know, he does know a thing or two. He's shifting more towards Europe, selling and delivering products there, so there are new contracts. He's trying to pull the American economy away from China, and he's actually succeeding. That's why, in this regard, China will be turning to the Russian market, which is much smaller and far less interesting. But they'll have to do it, because basically they have no other options for selling their products.
Yeah, well, remember, there was just some news, and I recall how Putin ignored statements about the possibility of high-level meetings. Is he ready to meet with Zelensky? And just now, while we were talking, information came out from Peskov that Putin does not rule out the possibility of meeting with Zelensky after the necessary work at the expert level.
That's them. They usually wrap these statements up as signing a capitulation, as they put it.
Exactly. So, Putin will only meet with Zelensky to accept Ukraine's capitulation. That won't happen. It won't be. There won't be such a meeting. You have to understand, I mean, sooner or later the war has to end somehow, because every war that starts ends. But wars end when both sides either don't want to or can't fight anymore. Unfortunately, today the enemy both wants to and is able to fight. We want to stop the war, but we are able to defend ourselves. We will defend ourselves for as long as it takes.
Our long-range strikes on Russia are inflicting significant and painful losses on them.
These are substantial strikes. In other words, this is systematic work. And those same Kinzels and calibers that are getting lost in Ukraine. Remember, 2 weeks ago, a lot of missiles just disappeared. This is a matter of our systematic work on various enterprises, on different factories that produce components. These strikes didn't yield results immediately. These are still our previous, even last year's strikes on various enterprises. In other words, these strikes don't produce results right away, like the very next day. But when there is consistency, and there is in Ukraine, we strike every week. We put Russian airports out of operation every week. These are the things that work over the long run. This is what will bear fruit for us in the fall, in the winter, in the spring. So, systematic strikes on their economy, on the defense industrial complex. These are our trump cards, as Donald Fridovich likes to say, that we have and that we are using.
That's some forward-thinking work. Thank you very much.
We have to work with foresight.
We'll be waiting for you again in our studio. Andrei Kachuk, Major of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, political scientist and volunteer, was with us.